What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. We hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you are enjoying the NFL playoffs. That's right. The NFL has been underway with the playoffs and is obviously going to be playing a Super Bowl sooner rather than later. We know that the Dallas Cowboys are not going to be a part of it, unfortunately, as the Cowboys finished with a disappointing 6-10 record on the year and have a lot of decisions to make with regards to their 2021 campaign. The Cowboys have already been, working towards 2021, actually. In the first week of the offseason, on the Friday of that week, they fired defensive coordinator Mike Nolan, who spent 1 year with the team. Obviously, Mike McCarthy's first year with the team as head coach, and that meant the Cowboys needed a new DC, and the Cowboys went to somebody who a lot of people actually wanted to see get this job. Former Atlanta Falcons head coach Dan Quinn is the new defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, we were actually streaming here on our YouTube channel when that news broke. And by the way, subscribe right here to the Blogging the Boys YouTube channel so you don't miss any one of our wonderful live streams. We like to get together, play the guitar around a campfire, sing songs, and of course, talk about the Dallas Cowboys. But Quinn is the new defensive coordinator in town, and there is a lot to be excited about in that capacity. Obviously, he was the head coach of the Falcons for the last half decade and achieved some success. Obviously, went to a Super Bowl. Yes, I know, lost 28-3 and all that stuff. But the last time that Dan Quinn was a defensive coordinator, things went rather well for him. The last time was actually the 2013 and 14 seasons. Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. In both of those seasons, the Seahawks made it to the Super Bowl as well. In fact, they won Super Bowl 48 against the Denver Broncos, demolishing one of the greatest offenses to ever live in NFL history. And of course, they lost Super Bowl 49 thanks to Malcolm Butler. But Dan Quinn, DQ, is now back in the DC chair in DC with the Dallas Cowboys. And obviously, we're all hoping that this works out. And in looking at what Dan Quinn could bring, we started to think about it, Blogging the Boys, well, who could he bring? Because oftentimes in the NFL, when coaches get to new places, they often bring old faces with them. They bring guys they know, guys that are going to be somebody they can coach, somebody they can trust, somebody that can kind of be a nice bridge to a new era for them in so many different terms. And so last year when the Cowboys got a new coaching staff altogether, essentially, we did this exercise. We looked at Mike McCarthy's former players. We looked at, obviously at the time, Mike Nolan's former players and John Fossil's former players because the Cowboys were retaining offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. And so we looked at them and we said, okay, who are some free agents that these guys know? Some guys that when they're on the open market, maybe they'll convince to come to Dallas and maybe they'll work out, etc. And we actually nailed a couple of them. The Cowboys wound up signing Clinton Dix, who Mike McCarthy knew from his time in Green Bay. That did not work out. But they also wound up signing kicker Greg Zuerlein, who John Fossil knew from his time with both St. Louis and Los Angeles Rams. That obviously worked out really well, and so we decided let's run it back. Let's figure out some free agents to be that Dan Quinn knows from both his time in Atlanta and other places and see if they might be some fits for the Cowboys in 2021. So let's get things started with cornerback Darqueze Dennard. And I think this is maybe the most likely candidate of the five that we'll be talking about here today because he'll probably be among the cheapest. And we know the Cowboys don't like to spend a whole lot of money in free agency. And for what it's worth, we've actually tried to get Darqueze Dennard on the Cowboys roster before at BTB. Darqueze is kind of that, every year there are a handful of veteran corners that are on the market. These are bad examples, but guys like Darryl Worley, guys like Nolan Carroll, that seemingly just kind of bounce around from place to place and find levels of success. Darqueze Dennard's, I think highest level of success came with the Cincinnati Bengals, but he did play for Dan Quinn in 2020 with the Atlanta Falcons. Darqueze is, you look at the cornerback position for the Cowboys, and there's no question they have a rising star in Trayvon Diggs. However, they have some other decisions to make. Yes, the Cowboys did re-sign Anthony Brown a year ago. Yes, they might take somebody like a Patrick Surtain with the 10th overall pick, but they also have some decisions to make in terms of other veterans. Both Chidobe Awuzie and Jordan Lewis, who the Cowboys took in the second and third round respectively in 2017, need new deals. And it's possible that we could see one or maybe both of them return to the Cowboys. In fact, I think that we might see a lot of one-year kind of prove-it deals around the NFL as a whole. Obviously, the pandemic dictated a lot of the season. In fact, it dictated the entire season. And so, God willing, everything calms down and things are more normal, and these players say, you know what, let me get 1 year that isn't in the COVID season to kind of prove my worth and get back on the open market and get a big-time contract. If that doesn't happen, even if that does happen, again, the Cowboys are going to just need bodies in the secondary at the cornerback position. And I think Darqueze is somebody who could ultimately be a legitimate candidate. Let's take a look at a couple of Darqueze Dennard's highlights. This one earlier this past season against the Chicago Bears, who obviously lost in the wild card round to the Saints. Mitchell Trubisky, that ball gets tipped, and that's a great job by Darqueze Dennard, just kind of getting in on Allen Robinson, a very underrated wide receiver in the NFL, and Darqueze Dennard played him rather well. Let's move on. Later in this game, Nick Foles comes in. Yes, Nick Foles throws deep, and look at Darqueze Dennard fighting for that and comes away with the interception again on Allen Robinson. That's a really impressive play, and these are the types of things that I think that we really want to see from the Cowboys. We want to see those turnovers. We want to see that aggression. We want to see challenging receivers of legitimate stature like Allen Robinson, and clearly Darqueze Dennard is somebody that has that capability. Again, look at this. Just getting your hand up there, playing the ball, not losing focus. This is a really, really nicely job done by Darqueze Dennard, and I think ultimately if the Cowboys end up bringing him in, it's not too shabby of a deal. But let's move on. Keanu Neal now to talk some safeties. Keanu Neal is maybe the name that most fans kind of know off the top of their head. You look at the Atlanta Falcons teams that did have legitimate levels of success under Dan Quinn, like that 2016 squad that won the NFC, the 2017 squad. We kind of look past that defense for the Falcons and that team as a whole. They lost the Super Bowl, and then they still made it back to the playoffs. I maintain that that is one of the more impressive things that Dan Quinn accomplished, even getting back to the playoffs despite the year before. And in fact, they lost at the last second in 2017 to the Philadelphia Eagles in the divisional round after they beat the Los Angeles Rams in the first year under Sean McVay. But I digress. People know Keanu Neal, people know Deion Jones, people know Grady Jarrett, and those are certainly big names. And Keanu Neal, his rookie contract is expiring as well, and he's an option. And look, I'm a fighting Texas Aggie. I love Donovan Wilson. I've said many times on our different streams or on our podcast, and make sure you do subscribe, by the way, to the Blog and the Boys podcast network, that as much promise and as much sort of hope for the future that Donovan Wilson showed in 2020, what the Cowboys cannot do is commit themselves to this, because we saw them make this mistake with Xavier Woods. We've seen them make this mistake with a lot of guys, to be frank. You cannot just be enticed by a run of games, some turnovers generated, and convince yourself that that is the answer to this hole, because the Cowboys have been searching for a star at safety for a long time. And I don't know that I think Keanu Neal is that guy, but I think he is at the very least a bridge to that guy. We don't know how this draft is going to go for the Cowboys, obviously. I don't think they're going to take a safety with a 10th overall pick. That just wouldn't make sense. But Keanu Neal is somebody that can help you kind of, just sort of tread water in that regard. And obviously, again, somebody that knows Dan Quinn rather well. Let's move on to some of his highlights. You see this moment right here with Patrick Mahomes. That is not an accident. Kansas City, in a game against the Falcons earlier this year, ran a trick play. They let Sammy Watkins, who almost was a Cowboy himself once upon a time, throw deep. And look at that. Keanu Neal plays Patrick Mahomes and comes away with the interception. Hey, I mean, I know it's a quarterback. It's not a receiver. That's not your normal highlight, but it still is a very impressive outing for Keanu Neal. And something like that, again, is really absent and has been for the Cowboys for a long time. Let's move on, though, because he is a safety. We want to see him blitzing right there, getting Matthew Stafford, who might be on a new team himself in 2021, but that's another conversation entirely. Keanu Neal, we want to see this, and we want to see this from Dan Quinn. And so Dan Quinn knows that he can utilize Keanu Neal in this way. So bring him to Dallas, do the right thing, get quarterback sacks, force turnovers, and let's party. Now let's move on to another safety, DeMonte KZ, another option. Did not play a lot in 2020, and so this is a bit more of a roll of the dice for Dan Quinn. Now, KZ co-led the NFL in interceptions in 2018 with 7. So obviously somebody that has an ability to generate turnovers in a way that we haven't totally seen from a Cowboys defender on a consistent basis in a very long time. Look, this is maybe your kind of secondary option, I think. And I'm not really pumped about the Keanu Neal situation, but if the Cowboys bring in somebody like this, I mean, this just makes sense. This is maybe the most obvious connection. Somebody, again, a Dan Quinn guy that didn't play a lot last year, that kind of needs an opportunity, a shot to revitalize his career, get some eyes on him, etc. That could be something that kind of works out ultimately, I think. But I don't know that I want the Cowboys to roll this dice. But still, we have to go back to 2019 for some highlights here. Check these both both out against the Carolina Panthers. Again, these are nice moments, but this is a tip ball that ends up as an interception. Hard to be upset when, your guy comes away with the football, but that's not going to happen on a regular basis. And you can't necessarily bank on this, obviously, but turnovers are turnovers. And I think that should be said. I think that should be celebrated to some degree because it hasn't happened on a consistent basis for a long time with the Dallas Cowboys. But nonetheless, an impressive outing. But that was his first interception in this game. Let's move on after we get the final look here. All right, interception. His second one in this game was a little bit more impressive, certainly. Not necessarily as much luck involved here, but you see, let's go. Throw that ball. Throw it. Okay. See, again, not a whole lot to really kind of be wowed about here, but again, an interception's an interception, and this is what I hope the Cowboys aren't lured by. This is just kind of, it's not a Hail Mary, but this is just kind of a YOLO ball, and you cannot depend on that. So, yeah, on paper, this looks like a great day. You get 2 interceptions against a division rival, but one of them came on a tip ball, and one of them came on a YOLO ball, but still, interceptions are interceptions. Shout out to Brandon Allen, of course. Now, these next 2 are a little bit more far-fetched, I will admit, but they are still options on paper nonetheless. Richard Sherman, you might know him certainly, experienced the highest levels of his career's success, obviously with Dan Quinn in Seattle, a Super Bowl champion on that Super Bowl 48 champion squad. Richard Sherman has been playing for the San Francisco 49ers for the last couple of seasons, and things have been okay, but, things haven't been what they were in Seattle because they never were going to be. And I think that's kind of a precaution that is necessary with Dan Quinn as a whole because, Dan Quinn's not going to have peak Richard Sherman, peak Cam Chancellor, peak Earl Thomas, spoiler alert in just a second, peak Bobby Wagner, peak Michael Bennett, peak Cliff Averill. I mean, you could go on and on and on about all the players that, people talk about the Legion of Boom, but that whole defense was so good for the Seahawks, and obviously has gotten a little bit different and certainly had a nice run towards the end of the year this particular season before they lost in the wild card round themselves. Getting back on track here, Richard Sherman is, like all of these players, all these guys that we're talking about are going to be free agents, so they will be options at the very least for the Dallas Cowboys in theory. Richard Sherman has had some comments before about Dallas Cowboys owner, president, and general manager Jerry Jones, so that needs to be said because that might obviously complicate the idea of him potentially joining America's team. But he is still a legitimate and a capable cornerback in today's NFL, and I maintain that, and there is some thought, like there always is, with elite corners that have just gotten older and lost a little bit of a step. You can look at somebody that Mike McCarthy obviously knows well in Charles Woodson. By the way, Charles Woodson really went to bat for Joe Witt, who the Cowboys hired to be their secondary coach and defensive passing game coordinator on Wednesday. Well, Joe Witt was a big, piece in Charles Woodson's kind of transition, which obviously was a big part of the Green Bay Packers defense. And so you could kind of see this working out in that exact same sort of way. It's almost the exact same, it's kind of like, I love Back to the Future, right? And I will never, ever say a negative word about Back to the Future. But it is kind of the same movie, right? Like, it's the same, like, action scene, when Marty's, like, on the skateboard, riding away from Biff or whatever. Like, it's the same movie 3 different times. This is kind of the same movie that Charles Woodson was for Mike McCarthy, and so if he wanted to emulate it, he could. Richard Sherman was on record, obviously, last year, you might remember, on Chris Collinsworth podcast that he hosts with him, and he talked about the defensive scheme the Cowboys were rolling with in terms of what Mike Nolan was doing, and he talked about how, maybe if this team gets back to kind of the core basic fundamentals of one particular defense, things might change there. Well, guess what, Richard? Because things are now kind of, I don't want to say back to fundamentals, but what this Cowboys defense was comfortable in was the defensive scheme that they were operating in with Rod Marinelli and with Chris Richard, which is something that Dan Quinn obviously knows well. It's something that Richard Sherman obviously knows well. And again, Richard Sherman's somebody that could benefit. Richard Sherman's obviously a very public player, somebody who has a lot of public opinions and things like that. And so if the Jerry Jones comments that he's made before can be overcome, I would potentially really like this fit. Let's take a look at some of what Sherman did in 2020. This is against those Rams, by the way. Jared Goff here, who's been impressive as of late, fires it deep and finds Richard Sherman all alone. This, again, a little bit of luck, and that's part of it when you're playing DB in the NFL, but hard to be upset. Again, I mean, I know I keep kind of pounding that drum, but Richard Sherman still capable of generating turnovers, still capable of finding the ball, and still capable of making some tackles, as we see here against the Washington football team. Alex Smith chucks it, and Richard Sherman there for the nice and easy stop. You like to see that. And again, people people, have accused Richard Sherman of making business decisions and things like that. This is a nice stop. This is an impressive moment against Terry McLaurin. Finally, yes, I know. It felt obvious. It felt like we had to go down this route, of course. You could not talk about Earl Thomas when you're talking about potential fits for the Dallas Cowboys defense, especially with Dan Quinn. This story, I talk about things you've seen before. We've watched this movie 1,000 times, all right? This is one of those movies that you owned when it came in the box VHS, the little slip cover, and then you got it when they released it in the super awesome edition, the plastic cover, I'm talking about, like the big awesome Disney movies. And then when this thing got remastered, you got it on DVD. And then when it got remastered again, you got it on Blu-ray. You got the digital download. You have it streaming. You have it on your Netflix list. Anywhere you go to access any level of media, Earl Thomas of the Dallas Cowboys is a story that you have seen 7 million times before. Earl Thomas is technically a free agent. He did not play in 2019 after a very public divorce with the Baltimore Ravens, who he played the 2019 season with. Earl Thomas very infamously played the 2018 season with the Seattle Seahawks. Very infamously, we've used that word several times now, gave a sign to Seattle Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll after getting injured for the season in 2018, and very, very, very publicly wanted to get to the Dallas Cowboys. We are actually over 3 years removed from the first instance that we all know to be when it comes to Earl Thomas and the Dallas Cowboys. You will recall that on Christmas Eve 2017, the Dallas Cowboys were hosting the Seattle Seahawks in what was effectively a playoff game. Both teams needed to win that game in order to keep their playoff hopes alive. Incidentally, both teams would depend on Dan Quinn and the Atlanta Falcons the following week to lose in order to get into the playoffs. That did not happen. Dan Quinn's team went to the playoffs, beat the Rams, like I said. But so all these things are kind of tied together in a funny way. But the Cowboys and Seahawks squared off in what was effectively a playoff game. The Cowboys lost, no big deal. It was super painful, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, that was Des Bryant's last home game with the Dallas Cowboys, who now plays for the Baltimore Ravens. I told you, everything goes full circle. Welcome to the National Football League. But anyway, after the game, as you know, Earl Thomas, chasing down Des Bryant, runs into Jason Garrett, says, "Hey, if you get the chance, come get me." Everybody freaks out. Everybody, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is this going to happen? What's going on, etc.? Are we going to get Earl Thomas? We do the whole song and dance in 2018. Nothing. We do the whole song and dance in 2019. Nothing. Obviously, last year when Earl Thomas was first released by the Baltimore Ravens, a lot of people thought that this was finally going to happen because the Cowboys at the time, optimism and confidence was still sky high. Dak Prescott was still there. On paper, the Cowboys looked unstoppable because they had just signed Everson Griffin, who we all thought was going to be awesome. We were all clearly right there. And ultimately, Earl Thomas just sat out the 2020 season. Again, the things that have, sort of encircled him are very, 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 very large, and obviously have played a role in why he did not play last year in the NFL. We all know how things go here. The more time that you put between things like that and the present, whenever the present is, the more attractive you become as an NFL free agent. And so it's possible that in 2021, Earl Thomas might look a little bit more friendly to a would-be NFL team. His price has obviously gone down. That was a big issue because he needed a new contract that he got with the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, he knows Dan Quinn very well. Obviously, the Cowboys still have a need at safety. There are a lot of obviously's, a lot of infamouses involved here. There are just a lot of the same dots to connect. And until this is not a thing, it kind of is a thing. And ultimately, I think that we all kind of moved on from it, but the Dan Quinn hire did breathe just a little bit of life into the idea that Earl Thomas could wind up with the Dallas Cowboys. And so maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. I do think, kind of like Richard Sherman, we look at the Cowboys defense of 2020, disaster, dumpster fire, a big reason for why Dan Quinn now holds the job that Mike Nolan used to. I think that I don't want to give the Cowboys an excuse, but losing Gerald McCoy was so big because I do think, and this isn't necessarily applicable to Earl Thomas, I realize this, I do think that the Cowboys defense needs a bit of an adult in the room, somebody who's been there, somebody who's done that, somebody who's played in big-time playoff games, somebody who's won big-time playoff games, somebody who's won a Super Bowl. A lot of people believe that Earl Thomas should have been named the MVP of Super Bowl 48 that the Seahawks won, not Malcolm Smith, who, again, to go full circle here, wound up playing for the Dallas Cowboys. But this is It would be interesting. It certainly would be interesting. It's hard to doubt that Earl Thomas would not be the best safety on the Cowboys. I mean, I don't think you think that the Cowboys would be getting prime Earl Thomas by any means, but I do think that there is still, at this point, even a year removed from playing an NFL game, there's no doubt that Earl Thomas is better than any option that the Cowboys currently have at safety, which is why this makes, at the very least, just a little bit of sense. Let's take a look at some Earl Thomas highlights. Obviously, from 2019, his only season with the Baltimore Ravens. This was actually week 1 of 2019. Ryan Fitzpatrick, who will play forever, fires deep, and there is Earl Thomas making a play on the ball. That's what we want. We want somebody like that. We want somebody with that mentality, and then who can get up and just be an athlete, somebody who can get up and just be an impact player. And that's something that Earl Thomas does all the time. You see this interception from a different angle. Let's move on. Later in the season, playing Tom Brady's New England Patriots. Right now, boom, Earl Thomas breaks in, breaks that pass up. That's what we want. We want somebody with that tenacity, somebody with that aggression. We haven't seen that in a long time. And maybe we see that with different players under Dan Quinn, but there's few players who have the instincts that Earl Thomas does, which is why it certainly would be nice if the Cowboys got a nice safety of his caliber. These are just 5 players with former ties to Dan Quinn, the new Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator, that would make some sense for the Cowboys to bring in. And I think that we will see something like that. That is one of the more predictable things in the NFL, is that there is always continuity involved. We know that this Cowboys defense needs a lot of help right now. Who are the players that you can rely on in terms of the Cowboys defense? You've got DeMarcus Lawrence, right? We're all pumped about him. And then you've got Trayvon Diggs. And I want to be careful here, because those are the players that we can rely on the top tier. I think there's a tier below that where we can rely on Randy Gregory. I think we can rely to a certain extent on Leighton Vander Esch. I think to a kind of different extent, we could potentially rely on Tristan Hill or Neville Gallimore. Those are kind of more question mark type situations. But after that, there isn't a lot to work with. This secondary needs a whole lot of help. I know we didn't even mention any pass rushers, any linebackers, but this secondary is arguably the worst unit on what is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So it's going to need a lot of help. It's going to need a lot of infusion. Dan Quinn is somebody who is more of a specialist when it comes to the front end of your defense, so perhaps he can take care of that pass rush. Joe Witt will seemingly and theoretically help him out here, and maybe we see the Cowboys kind of put everything together, get some of those familiar faces in, and have the success that we've all been wanting to see them have on the defensive side of the ball. But that about does it for our discussion here. Do me a favor, subscribe right here to the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel. We put out videos all the time, discussions, recaps. We go live, like I said, so we want to make sure that you're here to interact with us. Why? Because we love you. And make sure you subscribe to the Blog on the Boys podcast network. We are available on all major podcast platforms, as mentioned. I'm RJ Ochoa. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at RJ Ochoa. Make sure to stay tuned to blogontheboys.com for the best Dallas Cowboys coverage on the internet. And make sure to do us a favor. Have the best day ever. You know why? Because you deserve it. We'll see you next time.